Let's go!
And welcome to this edition of Fish Stripes Live, presented by Love Pop. That's LAPOP. And we are doing a different stream today. As usually, we do these streams an hour or two before the actual series begins. We just did finish a disappointing series versus the Atlanta Braves, which we will go into as we are. Wow, we're joined by Louis out of Hawaii. Okay, good one.
What's up, guys?
What up? So we're introducing now everyone. It's a small stream because it's at a weird time, 8 o'clock, but always joined by Kevin, Eli, and now Louis. We're going to be discussing this Atlanta series and then going into that Cubs series. We'll try to keep maybe a little under an hour since it's kind of late. People have stuff to do on a Thursday. Kevin didn't watch any of the games, but let's go to Eli. This was a very disappointing series for the Marlins, getting swept at home with guys like Jesus Luzardo, Sandy, going up against Bryce Elder. Who else? Max Fried didn't even start today. He was supposed to start.
Today it was Dodd or Dude. I think it's Dodd.
Dylan Dodd.
Dylan Dodd. Who in this, very frustrating for different reasons. We'd have to say the middle game was the most embarrassing one. I mean, for Braxton Garrett, Louis more so than anybody appreciates him and what he's done. He'd never had a game remotely like this in the big leagues. He'd had his struggles at times, but nothing like this. Nothing that you could ever imagine. A 7-run inning, and then to things to bite him later in the game when he's trying to stick around. That sticks out for one reason, and then the series finale sticks out for an entirely different reason because it was such a winnable game. It felt like. I mean, Luzardo was a little bit worse than you normally expect, but he was let down by his defense a lot. That Yuli Gurriel dropped pop-up was tough to watch. Later in the game, I think there was that Gene Segura play. I don't even think that cost him a run, but that was equally frustrating. And I think Nick Fortes had an errant throw on Ronald Acuna, stolen base. Like, the defense in this particular game was some of the worst that we've seen in an individual Marlins game this year. Offensively, they put up 2 runs immediately against this fill-in replacement for Max Fried, Dodd. And then the next 5 innings, nobody strikes out. They constantly put the ball in play, but couldn't push across just about one more run in the 5th inning. That moment in the 5th, down by 1, 2nd and 3rd, nobody out. That was a frustrating sequence. That reminds you of the sequences at the very start of the year when they were losing those close games to the Mets. That was a flashback to that, where we haven't seen a whole lot of that since then. They've been pretty good situational hitting wise when it comes to this recent stretch where they've been winning almost every series. That's what made this final game pretty disappointing. I skipped over the Sandy start. It was kind of more of the same stuff that we've covered on Fishology, that we've covered on other shows, that he's not quite on top of his game right now. It's not terrible, but he's in the situation where he's getting barreled more than we're used to seeing, and he's not having success the 3rd time through the order, so he can't get deep into the game. Overall, just frustrating from a bunch of different angles. Overall, the Marlins outscored 28-9 in this series. people famously remember that 29-9 loss to the Braves a few years ago.
They're close.
And this was like that stretched over an entire series. It wasn't really. It's funny how those numbers match up. I had not thought about that. Actually, now that I look at it now, I lied. It was actually 26-9. 26-9 overall. So
no, it was 29.
No, but I'm talking about this series. This year's. I gave the Braves a couple extra runs.
Yeah, no, that game where Pablo was charged with 9 runs, and I think Yamamoto was like 11 or 12. Yeah, 29-9.
Yeah, so this series only allowed 26 to the Braves. So give them a little bit more credit. It's been a slight improvement over the past few years in that regard.
Yeah, and then in that last game, really, I mean, you just look at it. Miami with 12 hits and they only produced 3 runs. It's pretty. I wouldn't even say embarrassing. It's just disappointing the fact that they aren't able to push more runs across at this point. I mean, Jorge Soler with the 2-run shot. I'm not sure who was it. Soler with the RBI too, Eli?
He hit a double as well, yes.
Yeah, Soler drove in all 3 runs today.
So there you go. So Jorge Soler off to a good start in May. I guess that's probably the most positive thing we could find out of this series, or maybe even that one game in general. Luzardo didn't look horrible, but I mean, obviously gave up 3 runs there. So not much more to say. I mean, you just got to hope that Miami could really feed off of Chicago and Arizona. And we'll talk more about, the moves Chicago made in preparations to face Miami. I mean, they call up their top prospects. So we'll talk more about that later.
I picked out this Jeremy Taché tweet because I know several other people have noted the same thing. Less divisional play this year than in recent memory. As a result, they've already played 2 series each against the Braves and the Mets, and that means only 2 series remaining against each of them the rest of the year, and most of those are in September. It's just one series between the Marlins and either of those teams between now and September. They play the Braves one more time. They don't play the Mets until the very end of the year. Those are the teams that have given the Marlins obviously immense trouble so far. They played well against just about everybody else. We'll see what that means. Overall, we know where the run differential stands. Even when they were winning series against other teams, the bigger picture just shows that they give up more runs than they score. So they have concerns on both sides of the ball, to be honest. More concerns than you would expect for a team that's at 500 right now.
Is this the first time Miami gets swept this year? Or did they get swept by the Phillies?
Yes.
No, this is the first
they won
time.
A game in that Phillies series.
First time that they've been swept in a series.
I'm pretty sure they won 2 in that Phillies series, no? Luzardo won one of those starts, unless they just won 1.
No, you're right. You're right, Lewis.
Okay, yeah.
You're right. They took 2. Yeah.
It's really disappointing when you look at the next 2 series. It's Chicago and Arizona. I mean, I know we've kind of heard it said a lot early this year, but I feel like those 2 series are maybe the most important to this point. And maybe you could say like every series that ensues after one is obviously the most important because it's furthering the length of your season. But Chicago, I think, has regressed a little bit. I believe they're at or just below 500 as well, if I'm not mistaken. I believe either they won today, so they'd be either 16-15, or they lost. I'm not 100% on that. Eli, you may have the scores.
Their last 6 games, they were 1-5. I believe they're 1-5.
So they're 15-16, I believe. So I think maybe Chicago is more winnable just because I think they're maybe not ready yet. But guess what, guys? They just called up Matt Mervis today, their top prospect, first baseman. So we're going to see him. I'm pretty sure you guys remember when Chris Bryant was a rookie in 2015. One of his major breakouts beyond, having a strong start to his career was the 2 home runs he hit against the Marlins, one being a grand slam, I believe, off of Jared Kozart in 2015. So maybe just rookie Cubs at Wrigley are good places to get your feet wet. And what's really sad is that Dylan Dodd, for the fact that this was just his 3rd career big league start, he kind of did pretty well today. He kind of did what you expected Brax to, at least what you wanted Brax to do after the tough inning. I mean, albeit he gave up 3 runs and not 7. He settled in, and, it just kind of speaks to Atlanta, not running out their Strider, who, it was a little sus his last start. Morton and Fried, who they pushed back, and yet they kind of just beat us with guys who they just pitch, they don't just throw. And I think that's just a testament to them. We could talk about the Marlins' inability to hit with men on, the inability to score early, their pitchers' inability to get through the 3rd time through the order without scuffing. But at the end of the day, I mean, the Braves won the World Series 2 years ago, and they're just top to bottom. You can make an argument that they're likely the National League's equivalent to the Rays, albeit maybe a little less powerful, but that just the stars on their team, and like the difference between their first and their 26th guy may be as close to similar as it is for any other team in the majors, as far as I'm concerned. I just think they're such a well-balanced team that, you know what, like you could expect to maybe get swept by a team like that because they're just that good. And even without a guy like Dansby Swanson, who they're going to see this weekend, they're just so balanced. So like the Marlins have their problems, but the Braves also are just so well run on and off the field that it doesn't surprise me that this kind of happened. You kind of expected some regression too, given where Miami is.
Yeah,
Well,
now you look at the standings here, Miami with the negative 52 run differential. And their Pythagorean record should not be good right now, if I'm correct.
It would
It
be
should be way under.
22.
Pythagorean. Yeah, it's all about run differential. That's what
10
it
and
uses.
22, Kevin.
10 and 22.
That's
There you
right
go.
there.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
literally the Minnesota Vikings of last season in
Yeah.
the MLB, right?
I remember that.
Like,
Yeah.
You remember the Vikings overplay, they'd either get blown out or they would lose very close games or they would win close games. It's kind of like that, except we don't have a field goal kicker. So, you know,
I think the thing that's saving the Marlins right now is just the division they're in and how everyone else is kind of falling apart, not named the Atlanta Braves. You had Justin Verlander today. Yeah, got rocked. Max Scherzer got rocked. The Phillies have not been producing as
They
well.
got swept
as
by
we-
the Tigers, bro.
Yeah, they got swept by the
Mets got
Tigers.
swept.
The
Verlander
Phillies have
did-
not been good. And then you have
Verlander
Nats
did pitch
before that.
better. He pitched better after that first inning. His fastball was up to 96. His breaking stuff looked excellent, and it looked like he really adjusted to the pitch clock. I was actually watching that game today while I was working, and I mean, like, you know what? He's just going to be a guy that's going to just.
That's a no-no.
I think you feel more confident in him than you do Scherzer, especially with the spin rate drop in his last start after the suspension, and then like Bryce Harper's back for the Phillies, and Trey Turner hasn't got going, and Brandon Marsh, even if he's like 70% of what he is right now, like, you know, they're going to be better. Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler aren't going to
Oh, yeah.
pitch to their kind of C grade potential the way they are right now. Like I think you kind of have to expect that the Phillies are going to be better. And then I mean, like I said it at the outset of the season, like you're kind of just like, and I said before, like the Marlins are getting very lucky with their run differential, and it's probably the thing I think we've touched on the most at the outset of the year because of the luck in one-run games and the way that they're just outperforming their Pythag, like to the 2021 Mariners level, albeit over a far smaller sample.
Yes.
I just think like you have to expect that the other teams in the division overall are just better, and that the Marlins are going to probably be again. I think realistically, you're looking at another fourth place finish. It's May, and like so much could happen, but I think we see that numbers tend to even out as the season goes along, and players tend to be who they are, or at least who we expect them to be. I don't really see the Marlins being better than any of these teams unless you just see some precipitous decline across the entire NL East, and I really don't see that coming.
Maybe not even the decline, Lewis. Maybe Sandy gets it going again. That's basically, I wouldn't say an automatic win, but it's someone you could rely on a lot more to at least keep a team under a run or two. And maybe, with injuries, guys coming back, you kind of hope maybe Miami could somehow find a way to sustain what they're doing right now, which is unsustainable. And we all could agree what is happening right now is very unsustainable. But I mean, if they get lucky, later in the year, they find themselves kind of in the same spot where they are now, maybe a C or two lower. You could see them maybe try to swing a deal or two. And we won't get that deep into this conversation, but I could see them kind of sticking where they are right now, where, they're kind of like what we saw with the Phillies last year, where they were just right there with the wins and the losses, just hovering over 500 and under it until the very end of the year. But we'll see what happens. I mean, at the end of the day, the Phillies did get in through the wild card and eventually, World Series, but I don't think the Marlins will get to that point. Definitely, I think they'll fight themselves into they'll be in the wild card fight, kind of like we saw Milwaukee last year.
Eli, do you want to entertain this thought? And Danny, and in part two, if you'd like, the Marlins are kind of in the same boat that the Yankees are right now, where you just don't know what you're going to get out of the starting rotation for the most part. They don't have Sandy pitching the way that Garrett Cole is, and I don't think anybody's really pitching the way that Garrett Cole is right now. You have no idea who you're going to get your contributions from offensively. It's just their records are similar, but you kind of just have a lot of guys that you're just not too sure of right now. I mean, there's similar questions that you have. I think the expectations are obviously different, but it feels like those two are kind of playing the same brand, or at least same level of baseball at the current time. Your thoughts, though?
I don't know if I see that comp with the Yankees. The big storyline with them is extraordinary injuries, including their very best player, Judge, and all the way down. Yeah, from almost every aspect of their team is impacted by injuries. The Marlins, to this point, they're kind of middle of the pack. And if you look at the ones that are at due to injuries, they're not exactly pivotal performers. The most recent ones being Avi Garcia and Garrett Cooper. I mean, Cooper, all right. I'm trying to look as to what other team across the league they're most comparable to. That is an interesting thought to raise here.
If you go run differential, it's the Rockies. I mean, and
right,
right. And
that's not good.
I mean, hey, the Marlins lost Cueto for an extended time so far, and they just lost German Marquez. So, pick straws where you want, but the run differential suggests they're very similar at the moment.
Maybe the Astros, they're kind of in a similar spot as the Marlins right now. Not obviously the same quality team, but record-wise, if we're looking at that, they've been kind of underwhelming too.
Yeah, I think that is probably a little bit closer, where they have several guys in the middle, several guys underperforming, and that they're kind of in the same perilous position with their rotation, where it's looking a little thin on the back end. If they lose anybody else in their rotation, then you really worry about how that can hold up. And that was the strength of their team last year, the same way it was for the Marlins, expected to be for the Marlins coming into this year. They have some younger players that are kind of underperforming, like Jeremy Pena. What are his overall numbers at this point? He hasn't really built off last year quite. He's kind of like replicated last year, but not really progressed much in any way. And they have guys like Bregman. They're missing Altuve. They've had Bregman and Abreu disappoint. I think, strangely enough, I do think the Astros have quite a bit in common, except for them, of course. They've been there and done that every year, especially last year. So with them, they have veteran players that you have a lot of confidence in bouncing back. And with the Marlins, they have veteran players that, oh boy, we're getting pretty close to I guess one positive from the last few days has been Nick Fortes, very steadily getting back into form. I think he's reached base in 8 straight starts. His OPS is finally over 600. So that's finally somewhat respectable, especially for a catcher. The fact that he's clearly distinguishing himself from Stallings at this point. And more so, that's because Stallings is somehow even worse than he was at this time a year ago. That is one thing, both the positive of Fortes progressing and also eventually trending towards a position where you wonder if they might do something different with that Stallings roster spot in order to bring in more offense and more defense and more everything. The question is how long they wait before making these tough decisions on underperforming veterans, such as Stallings. With Avi Garcia, they kind of took a half measure by putting him on the IL. And then Gene Segura is in that similar boat where every time it looks like he might be breaking through, he has a series like this. He was pretty bad in this series, hitting into a couple more double plays, making that, I think he made a bad defensive play in this game and still just hitting everything on the ground or in the infield. The question is how long and what alternatives they have to those holes in their lineup.
Yep.
Yeah.
I believe it's 10 double plays now for Segura, if I'm not mistaken.
It's a lot.
He's got a ways to go to reach Casey McGee, who I think 31 in 2015 was the club record.
Yeah, he's ahead of pace. He's ahead of McGee's pace right now, unfortunately.
Going back to that series, I wanted to talk about maybe the bullpen for a bit. I know it wasn't really that hot. We got to see Devin Smeltzer come back and then go down and then come back up again. AJ Puk, today's game did not look great at all. I know Lewis wanted to talk about that and maybe what you saw from AJ Puk today.
Well, just from kind of listening, I was listening to the radio broadcast with Kyle. I didn't watch the game today, admittedly, because wasn't home, I wasn't available to, but I followed along. It's just one of those things. It's do you suspect that he's just kind of coming back to earth a little bit? I didn't expect AJ Puk to maintain a sub-1 ERA for the totality of a 60, 70 inning season out of the bullpen. I mean, you kind of just expect that. And I've said it before, relievers are going to have blowups, and your ERA especially is built on those blowups. So it didn't surprise me. I feel like it was inevitable. I mean, Floro was dynamite for the first month, and then he blew up late in April. So it happens to the best of them. I mean, he gave up the home run to believe who was that dude? Wasn't to Olsen or did he give a
Olsen.
home run up?
Olsen.
Okay, so Olsen hit 2 homers today. No, he hit one last night. I'm not 100% sure.
Ozuna had like 5 this series.
Ozuna had
hit
3 in the Grand Slam.
Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me. I think we talked about it on Fishology. I believe Puck's FIP was his xFIP was almost 4, and that was when his ERA was below 1. So I think you kind of have to adjust your expectations when you have those numbers that are very telling and indicative of a guy who's not going to sustain this dead ball era Dutch Leonard run prevention kind of streak that he was kind of putting up for about a couple of weeks. So you expect it, and it was nice to see Floro pitch a scoreless inning. I believe his ERA is below 2 again. So, same old Dylan Floro after what was once a blow up. And we talked about it on Fishology too. The bullpen got incredibly lucky early in the season. Their FIP was almost half a run higher than their ERA, and even then their ERA was almost 4.5. So, how much can you really expect? Again, I think it's just a lot of guys that are pitching out of place, and there's a lot of closer by committee. There's just there's people are kind of like chickens running around with their heads off for what seems like a good part of a month now.
And someone I want to shout out who had a very nice outing today, I believe. I think he had a good outing. It was Brazoban.
Yeah.
Brazoban, yeah. I don't think he allowed any runs, but just to go back and look at the box score.
Yeah, he took an inherited runner from Luzardo and he stranded him, and then he pitched another scoreless inning. On top of that, he got into a little trouble in that inning, but he escaped without any damage in that 7th inning. But I wanted to spotlight him too, because I think this has gone over not just how good he is, but how different he is even from last year. Last year, the reason I was skeptical about him last year is that, well, one, when you're 32 years old, which he was at the time, and you've never reached the big leagues, and you're kind of struggling to throw strikes in AAA, and that follows you up to the big leagues, generally somebody that far into their professional career, they just never address that control issue. That's something that you generally figure it out earlier on, or you never figure it out. So with him, even though he had success last year, I didn't trust him to throw enough strikes to get ahead in enough counts. As nasty as his stuff is, I worried that he would just be imprecise enough and he'd get himself into too much trouble to be reliable. And it looked like that was carrying over the first week and a half of this season. If you remember, he was surprisingly hittable his first few outings. He also had I counted them up. He had 3 walks and 2 hit by pitches the first couple weeks of the season. Ever since then, we're coming up on nearly a full month that Brazoban has not walked any hitters. He has not hit any batters. He has been almost impeccable over the last 3.5 weeks. He has not given up a run. He has, and as I said, he's not putting anybody on base in the first place. He's getting as many strikeouts as ever. He has quietly been as hot as any reliever in baseball over those last few weeks. Even now, if you include Puck's latest struggle, that's kind of leaves him over Puck. But he's been just as good as Puck over those recent few weeks, surprisingly, because he's not putting any free runners on base. That has been an extremely pleasant surprise. I showed this Isaac take that Brazoban could be an all-star this year. That's not going to happen just because of the role that he's used in. You never see middle relievers put into that position, no matter how good they are. I think we had the same conversation about Anthony Bender 2 years ago when Bender was red hot early in that season. It is still a really great story. I went through the bullpen on the official show where I ranked them, and I said Brazoban is really right there, right below Puck and Floro, and that is aging pretty well. I think that's a clear top 3. We were talking the general vibe has been you have that great 1-2 punch with Puck and Floro. I think you need to consider lumping these 3 into a similar tier because of this newfound awesome control that Brazoban has combined with the nasty stuff that he throws.
Yeah, just to back you up on the Brazoban walks, right now he's putting up the lowest walks per 9 of his career at a 1.53. His strikeouts are 9.68, but I mean, just to say that even he's doing this on his own without the help of the defense. Just look at his FIP, 2.79, which is pretty good. I mean, when you look at it, and then there's an xFIP of 2.96, and this guy's just throwing heat, man. I mean, this guy, when you look at his baseball savant percentiles, almost all of them are in red except one. I think it's fastball velocity, since he uses the cutter as his main pitch. So, I mean, what Isaac says here, he chance to be an all-star, he definitely does. I mean, at this point, Brazaban has really set himself as one of the best relievers in the National League. I won't say in baseball yet, but definitely in the National League. I mean, if he continues doing what he's doing and really not walking anyone and making guys miss, that's definitely something you need to see in Brazaban, and maybe at some point put him in more high leverage situations. I mean, he's been used in every situation, I believe, this year. He's been put in the long relief. He's done it all. I don't think he's even has he gone for a save opportunity yet, Eli, or not yet.
I know he hasn't converted any saves. I kind of disagree about like you don't have to move him around. I think he's perfect the way he is. He's really valuable to the team. The way they used him today, when it was still like a really close game, and he took over for Luzardo with a runner on base, that was a really important situation. I think this is just if it's not broke, don't fix it. Just make sure that he continues. I think you want to make sure that he is always pitching in important situations. I guess I would add that to it. You don't want to waste him in those long man situations, knowing that now he has just been so consistent. I do not foresee him like having this kind of consistency the way that he's had the last few weeks.
Yeah, no, the only reason I mentioned that was because they've used him that position before. I know they did very early on in the year, but they changed that up. And I guess the only other reliever we could give some props to is I think Tanner Scott. I think at least give him a mention. I mean, he got that save in that Chicago series. He looked really good. He's looked really good thus far in the season. Besides the little mess up in New York, he's been all right. I mean, he had the save. He hasn't been used as much as I thought they would use him. When Floro and Puck aren't available, they go to Barnes and Scott, and he's looked all right. I mean, the stats don't really back me up on it, but I think I think it's more of an eye test type of thing that when the guy's on, he's throwing strikes and he's getting guys out. I mean, we've seen it before. He already has 2 saves on the year. He's looked good. I think that's how I'll put it, and I think the stats will shape up, or later on in the year once he gets more opportunities. But I mean, I think that's really about it with the bullpen, unless you guys want to shout out Matt Barnes.
I just want to do a shameless plug for Matt Barnes. He was a really great interview guest with Noah on our pod. That's available if you're watching on YouTube. It's on the same channel.
Do we have that for a commercial break?
Yeah. Well, we can take a break right here. I don't actually have a clip of it queued up, but it's 20-something minutes of Matt Barnes and Noah going through his career to this point, and some interesting things that he has to say about pitching in Miami, about working with the Marlins staff as well. The fact that he's throwing a new pitch this year. You'll have to watch the episode to find out what new pitch he's throwing that we finally got some clarification on. I talked to the people that make these graphics for Baseball Savants, and I told them about his new pitch. It was a really great interview. So we thank Matt for that. And we do the series throughout this season with Noah and other relievers on the team.
Yep.
Yeah, so we're going to go for a quick break, and then coming back, we're going to preview this Cubs series 24 hours in advance. We're gonna talk about the new matchups, what we might see differently from that series that we saw last time when we swept them. Obviously, roster moves. We're going to talk about the new top prospects coming up from the Cubs and what the Marlins can expect going up against him, and a lot more. Stay tuned. And we are back. We are now going to preview this much anticipated series between the Chicago Cubs and the Miami Marlins. And for your pitching matchups for this series for Miami, it's going to be Edward Cabrera for Friday. Saturday is shout out to Alex Carver, Mr. Brian Hoeing, and then Sandy will be back on the bump for that Sunday game. All these games are at 2:20 p.m., so that is why we're doing it early, because people are doing things work Friday at 1 o'clock, so it'll be impossible to do.
I'm at school
there. Yeah, Kevin's in kindergarten camp, but there's your matchups. That Friday one looks to be the best one there, between Justin Steele and Edward Cabrera. But Well,
Sure.
I mean, I'm talking about between the two. If you look at both, Justin Steele has been really good.
Wisniewski's been pretty good too.
Really?
Yeah, he's
Oh.
giving me some good fantasy
Well,
help.
by the way, so we can't do our normal starting lineup post during this because the starting lineups are not out for another like 15 hours. But we can do something similar with the same baseball savant previews that we do. Just give me one moment. It lets us actually look at everything, all the players instead of the specific lineups. We could at least look at all the players on the active rosters and their and their percentile.
While you do
rankings.
that, I want to ask Lewis on that the next matchup there, the pitching matchup, Drew Smiley, who's having a career year for the Cubs. What has he been doing differently, and maybe what the Marlins should really look at, especially for that matchup? They're putting in Brian Hoeing and Drew Smiley, a guy who flirted with a perfect game. I believe his ERA is 2.30, 2.50, I believe. What have you seen from him?
2.83, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I mean, he was it a couple of years ago with Atlanta. I mean, he was on that World Series team. You talk about the Braves kind of just fixing guys or even just getting the most out of guys. He's kind of like, not going to compare him directly, but he's almost like a Kershaw light with where he's a soft tossing lefty. I'm not comparing career pedigree. I'm merely assessing the type of pitcher they are now and what they kind of do to deceive hitters. And, Smiley, I mean, when he came up with Detroit, he was a lefty throwing low to mid-90s. And we've seen that velocity taper off. I believe he's been in the big leagues 2011, 2012. So it's been over a decade. And now he's kind of 90 to 91. He kind of has this like frisbee slider. It's almost like Rich Hill-like, but it's not, it's thrown a little bit harder. He kind of just relies on command and deception. I mean, you look at his walk rates. He's not a guy that's going to allow a lot of free passes. He's one of those guys like a Wade Miley is right now in Milwaukee, where he just kind of gets a lot done with the lack of stuff in an age where, fastball velocity is the thing that we all laud the most. I mean, he's just a guy that kind of relies on deception more than anything else. And I think the Marlins need to attack early because if a guy's throwing a lot of strikes, you kind of have to be on the attack on that. And, I could see guys like Jazz, maybe Peyton Burdick, who hasn't really done all that much. I believe he drew a walk today, which is encouraging. But, it's been 2 games, so you use series against guys that don't necessarily throw mid-90s. I mean, Justin Steele, too, who the Marlins faced last Sunday, he throws low to mid-90s. That's another guy that you can kind of see, Miami looking to take advantage of, though he's been excellent this year beyond, one start, I believe he gave up 4 unearned runs, but again, that's not his fault. So you kind of just have to be on the attack early with these guys. These are strike throwers. The Cubs are, they've struggled for a little bit and now they're kind of figuring things out. So I think being aggressive is something that they need to kind of take into this series with them, especially because you kind of have to expect that they're going to play them a little bit differently considering how well they did in that first meeting this year. But, it's just a matter of kind of being on the attack against these guys, because if you fall behind, Smiley's got enough guile and deception to be able to, he could put you away. I mean, like, he doesn't need 98 to strike guys out. He can, we saw that game against the Dodgers where he took a perfect game into the 8th before him and Yan Gomes played leapfrog. He was kind of just getting guys to swing underneath his slider. He was spotting the fastball really well. And when he had that stuff working, he could, go up against pretty much any lineup. And he went up against one of the best, especially now, go up against a disheveled Marlins lineup. What is there to expect? So you kind of just have to be aggressive against those kind of guys.
I wanted to just quickly say, I mean, Lewis mentioned that he doesn't give up, Smiley's a guy who doesn't give up many walks. He's actually putting up the lowest walks per 9 of his career at a 1.54. Something that's a little bit, I guess concerning about Miley is, the ERA 2.83.
Smiley.
It's good. Smiley, yeah, Smiley. And his FIP, who did I say?
Yeah, you said Miley, like Wade Miley.
Oh, Smiley, my bad.
That's okay. I mean, they're both soft tossing lefties.
Yeah. And then, the FIP, 3.50, which is good. It's good, but, maybe a little deceiving. The XFIP at a 4.54. So if Miami has a chance to get at Smiley, that's going to be huge for them. And then the other player, and now we're looking at the lineups, you could see him right at the top in all red. It's Patrick Wisdom, who is having a pretty good year. You know, yeah, I was with Hector on Saturday when the Cubs were in town, and he was someone who Hector had just told me about. He's like, you know, Patrick Wisdom's having a pretty good year, and you know, he goes out there and hits a homer. So just gonna go out here and look at the stats for Wisdom, and I think he's over the 10 homer marker already.
Yeah,
he's at 11 with 21 RBIs. I mean, the guy's hitting 238, 325, 624 with a 149 WRC plus.
Jacob Stallings
he's walking at a 10% rate. I mean, much more improved than last season where he only hit 207, 298. Just I'm not even going to keep going there, but I mean, much more improved hitter. Obviously, Wrigley Field helps out a lot. And then Nelson Velasquez, who had a really good series against Miami, is another player I would watch out for. He was recently called up, I believe, before that series against Miami, but I think Danny wants to talk about him. I think we got to talk about Team Israel legend, Matt Mervis, who was with the team and is the top prospect for the
He's a
Chicago
big power hitting guy. He was third in the minors all of last season in terms of home runs. This is a big, just a big slugger. It's a big bat for the Cubs. What they've needed as of late, they haven't really been able to score runs. I believe they got lost 2 out of 3 against the Nationals, which is never good. And then obviously they got swept by us or the Marlins. But this is something that they need, something for the middle of the bat, middle of the order. I know this is going to be hard for Kevin, so Kevin might have to shut his ears. They might have to DFA either Edwin Rios or Eric Hosmer. One of those guys are probably
Eric Hosmer. Yeah, I mean it makes more sense to DFA. Well, yeah, no, likely Edwin Rios makes more sense. They do also have some random catching prospect at the bottom of that list that Eli was showing. I think it was like Miguel Amaya or something. Maybe that's the guy who goes. Yeah. But, I mean, look, with Mervis, he's actually showing a lot more patience at the plate this year, putting up the highest walk per 9 of his career at 16.1%, striking out at a 17% rate. I mean, a guy putting up a 140 WRC plus. He's having a good year. Lewis, if you want to add anything on Mervis from what Danny and I have already mentioned.
I think I'll just kind of circle back and maybe Rios. And I know that hurts you, Kev, as a future FIU alum. To a former one, that's probably going to hurt because he's struggling. I believe he had a double in that series against Mike. He really hasn't done all that much. Maybe that's just another example of like you leave the Dodgers and you kind of just forget how to play baseball kind of thing. So I don't know. I think, and Hosmer has been all right for what it's worth. He's been, his typical kind of average to slightly below average defensive first baseman that he's kind of been. The Gold Gloves he's like a Derek Jeter type where the Gold Gloves aren't indicative of the fact that he's actually a really average to below average defender. He's hitting okay, so I think he'll kind of retain his spot also based on like tenure in the game and kind of stuff and proven track record. So, but Mervis is probably a guy that you expect to play right away. He'll be exciting to see. You talked about his numbers. If you can strike out at a sub 20% clip while walking at a very similar clip, I mean, you expect regression in the big leagues, but even then, he's going to have. If Edward Cabrera does happen to throw a strike on Saturday and he's in the line, or Friday and he's in the lineup, we could be in for some tank jobs out in Wrigleyville.
Yeah. Well, while we're talking about call-ups, this has been touched on previously, but I think we finally reached the Joey Wendle return point. He has played 6 rehab games, including today where he hit this game-winning home run. Joey Wendle, a home run in this AAA game, inside fastball, and he got his hands in and he yanked it over the wall in these. I don't know what you described these uniforms that they were wearing for this game, but looking sharp. Wendell's been there now for a full week. Maybe Star Wars related because it is May the 4th after all. Not entirely sure. Yeah, other teams are celebrating that, I know. But with Wendell, Lewis touched on how with most AAA players, you expect some regression when they reach the big leagues. The Marlins hoping for the opposite somehow because Wendell only hit about 185 during this rehab week. And that was – he hit that home run. He hit another double, but overall didn't perform well, all things considered. He's been out for, as we know, a full month at this point with an intercostal strain. He entered this year as their primary shortstop. I think we're all on the same page, but who do we expect if Wendell does return tomorrow, which I think is a strong possibility? Who do we think gets squeezed off the Marlins roster in the corresponding move?
It's hard because there's a couple candidates. I know the first one that a lot of us mentioned was Jesus Sanchez, but the way he's been playing lately, it's really hard to do that DFA. And if they were to DFA him, I do think he would get claimed in this case with how hot he's been. I mean, Garrett Hampson has kind of started coming back down to earth little by little. That's a name to think about. De La Cruz has been horrible. We spoke about him on Unfiltered today with Isaac. He's been really bad. I mean, besides the hit today, he's been horrible. There's just another way to put it. So that may be a guy you'd move down. Besides that, I mean, those are the real candidates that really come to mind. Oh, my bad. Xavier Edwards, who was recently called up for this series. Infielder, really only had 2 at bats the whole series. Got his first major league hit. Didn't play too much.
3, I think.
Was it 3? 3 at bats?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
got
Yeah,
3.
it was 3. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, that's someone who probably makes the most sense. Most minor league options. It's an easy shortstop for shortstop swap if you look at it that way. I mean, as much as I love Xavier Edwards and as good as he's been for the Jumbo Shrimp, yeah, I think that's probably the move that will happen. Now, I do think if Hampson goes, I think it would be a DFA in this case. If he is DFA'd, I do think he would go by waivers, unless a team really needs a utility guy like Hampson. And I mean,
I think someone will pick him up.
I don't think that happens though, because I mean he's crushing left-handed pitching.
He's playing, that's the thing. Like he's
and the
Marlins,
well, we know that they couldn't hit lefties to save themselves last year. I wrote in the What Went Well that they were arguably, I think they had one of the worst OPSs against lefties in like 50 years. Like going back to last year you kind of have to take what you can. I think too, like Hampson is more like he's shown that he's versatile, and he did that a little bit in Colorado. So I think even with John Birdie there, that still means something. It's like, what are you weighing? Are you weighing the fact that there's still options on Edwards, like you mentioned, or the fact that De La Cruz has just been so bad, but yet he has a longer big league track record. So what do you believe more? But I mean, like it's so bad, like, because it's De La Cruz today. Even I believe he made a play that allowed Albies to go to second, or was it Rosario to go to second on a ball hit in like was it the 3rd or the 4th inning that Atlanta wound up scoring? Like he's had some lapses of judgment out there defensively. We've talked a lot about the fact that he just had a franchise record for strikeouts in a 7-game series. He struck out 17 times in a 7-game stretch. Like when you're striking out as much as Giancarlo Stanton and you're doing it with like a 5th of the power, then there's obviously something that has gone awry. And look, like the last time he went to the minors, he came back and he looked like Will Clark for a month. So like, who knows? Like he may just be a guy that just may have to kind of just go back to the minor leagues and figure some things out, because he's also just being incredibly too aggressive. You could have your own podcast about De La Cruz's struggles all on their own. Like, but we're not going to do that because it would just be word salad. So I don't know. I mean, like Edwards, they're both logical picks to go down. And if you send him down, I guess you have to play Sanchez more in left field. And, there may be an instance where you're going to have some guys playing out of position. Maybe Edwards, who's primarily just played center field and the infield, like he's going to be playing out of position at some point. So it's confusing, but I don't know. Like, I feel like Eli would probably have a point that makes a lot more sense, that illuminates more to us, and be like, all right, like, we can maybe come to a general consensus on like who should go down. But, I'm kind of stuck between those two guys. Like, but if I pick one, gun to my head, I'd probably just go De La Cruz.
Yeah.
I understand the case for De La Cruz. I think the issue now that we probably haven't acknowledged as much as we should is that Soler, after playing quite a bit of outfield in spring training and a little bit early in the season, they're viewing him kind of as an exclusive DH, and that limits how many. That means that there's now a scarcity of outfielders on the roster. They called up Burdick, and they have Sanchez up there now, but now that they lost half of Soler, whatever Soler was going to give them there for the time being due to manage his back issues. And now having lost Avi Garcia, you can argue whether or not that's an actual loss for the team, but that was a available body who was playing a lot of time in the outfield. It makes it more difficult to send down full-time outfielders like De La Cruz at this point. So my long story short, I anticipate Xavier Edwards being the move. The fact that they haven't started him in any of those previous 3 games despite calling him up, it shows that they don't really have a role for him at this particular moment, or they don't think he's ready for like a substantial role, I don't think they would have him just riding the bench. Considering what they invested to acquire him, considering how he's performing, they want to give him the shot to grow into something more of that and get regular playing time, and he'll get that regular playing time back down in AAA. I imagine with DLC, I do think he has to be on a pretty short leash at this point. If this continues much longer, as you touched on, it's not just the hitting. The hitting's been horrendous, but it's also been it's slipped into other parts of his game. We've seen it in the outfield, and we've seen it even as a base runner. The one really great offensive moment he had in this Braves series, he crushed that double to the center field wall. It was almost a home run. He must have thought it was a home run because he wasn't able to get to second base. And the fact that he even tried to go to second base when the team was trailing by a pretty big margin, I don't even think that's the first time he's done that in this season, like trying to stretch a single into a double when the team was already trailing by a big margin and his run didn't mean much. It's been really disappointing. Both the performance and just the lackadaisical style that he goes about it. So I think in the near future, if this does continue, maybe even just for another week or so, then you consider bring up yet another outfielder in his place. Whether it is in the chat, they've talked about Jake Mangum and how he's performing. The fact that at least defensively, that'd be an upgrade over DLC and as a base runner as well. So whether it's him, whether it's Gerard Encarnacion, he'd be the other candidate, considering that Cooper's out. I think if Cooper's going to be out for a substantial period of time, and that Encarnacion can help a little bit at first base, the way that he's performed, which has been pretty great at AAA, maybe that merits a little cup of coffee for him. So, and I think both of those players, well, more so with DLC, he's the one that's been a really recent disappointment for this team. At this point, he's going to need to be held accountable for those struggles pretty soon.
What about that guy? Oh, sorry. I was just going to mention, what about that guy in that screen we see right there, right under the score bug, Mr. Charles LeBlanc? What are his hopes into seeing the MLB roster again after getting off the hot start last season to now where he's hitting 200 in AAA?
Well, not only is he not on the 40-man, so you would have to clear a 40-man spot for him, I believe, is the case.
Yep.
And then you see it, the batting average. You don't even have to read the rest of the stats. This guy just hasn't been good in AAA. I mean, I love LeBlanc. I think he's a really good player. He was really good last year for the team. He was probably one of the more successful guys on the Marlins. Really surprising DFA, but it looked like the Marlins knew something was coming or some type of regression was coming with LeBlanc, and here it is. And I know he's dealt through injuries throughout this past spring, so maybe that still has a play in it. But, with DLC and Sanchez, these guys are just mainly DLC. Such like bipolar players when you look at it, because there's this, it's so weird. And maybe there's like more specific stat with it besides just a monthly split, but like DLC, there's times where he looks phenomenal. I mean, we saw it in September of last year. We saw it really early on at the start of last season. He was really good when he first got traded to Miami. There's just times where he looks like this. And there's no real point I want to make with it. It's just something I wanted to point out. And the same goes with Sanchez. There's times where Sanchez, and we saw it in 2021, he looked great. In 2022, he looked really bad. And now this season, I mean, obviously the lack of playing time has definitely been a factor in terms of, not having much success. But, now with Avi Garcia out, he's going to have more playing time. And, Eli mentioned Mangum and Encarnacion. And at some point, Encarnacion has been a big leaguer before. He knows what it's like to be up here. Something I do want to mention is those guys are definitely forced in making, these guys are breathing down DLC's neck at this point. The way Mangum is playing, and not only that, he's a center fielder naturally, natural center fielder. So if you need a guy out there every once in a while to play you center field, Mangum could do that. If you need a first baseman, now with Cooper out, I don't think there's a backup first baseman on this team. You could have Gerard Encarnacion, who definitely has had a really nice year with the team in AAA. So these guys are breathing down DLC's neck, and they're really going up there for a roster spot. And, we told ourselves AAA would probably be one of the more boring teams in the minor leagues, and, in terms of the minor league organizations for the Marlins. That may be one of the more interesting ones just with talent that, I guess these guys, how they've been playing thus far. Obviously, Beloit's the team to watch, but Jacksonville's been pretty fun in terms of just some specific guys, is the way I would put it. Not the most interesting team.
On the hitting side, it's been interesting. On the pitching side, it's been the opposite of whatever interesting is. On the pitching side, it's been Jeff Lindgren and Chichi Gonzalez. And the most interesting pitching is just the relievers, that we already know about. But honestly, it's been it's been messy on the pitching side from that aspect. With Gerard, the one other thing to remind people is that he is already on the 40-man roster, which gives him that inside track potentially.
Mangum isn't.
Yeah.
I guess we could go into the roster move. The most important roster move of the year.
Go ahead, Kev.
Chichi Gonzalez called up or recalled is the way we could put it. Devin Smeltzer was DFA'd. Yeah, selected contract. He wasn't even. I don't think he was in 40-man. This year, Chichi Gonzalez is a 5.87 ERA, 5.55 FIP. He has a 0-1 record, 7 games, 5 started, 23 innings pitched, 2.74 walks per 9, 5.87 K per 9.
Kev,
at this point, he's gonna be a long reliever for this team, kind of like what Smeltzer was basically.
I think he'll come in after Hoeing start. I think Hoeing will go 4.
Maybe that's the case, and then probably DFA the day after, and that's when you can make way for another reliever to come up. I mean, at this point, you'll probably just be alternating those two guys as Smeltzer and Chichi as the long relievers, unless they find a stable guy there to put there. But we'll see. I mean, Soriano hopefully comes back soon. I know he can't come back yet because he was sent down fairly. I think it was like a week ago, so he's not ready to be recalled yet. Is the word we could use here in this case. But once he's back, then we should be good.
I don't know, Eli. Do you want to do prediction times, or maybe you want to get some questions from the audience? Maybe we could take like 3 questions and answer that, or because it'll be a little difficult for predictions for right now.
I think I don't know. You guys aren't ready for yours. I haven't taken them from the super subscribers yet. I'm giving them like later tonight and tomorrow morning. But I don't know. Well, we have it. We can record the 4 of us if we already have predictions in mind.
Well, quick shout out to Pat Monteverde, minor league pitcher of the month for the Southern League. 6 strikeouts today, no walks, only 2 hits, 1 earned run. That was a homer. So they've looked good. I guess if we want to go into my leagues, I'm not going to look too much since we don't have Carver here today. But look at that. Look at those stats. Can't be happy with what he's doing. And this is something Eli told me, and I've stuck with it, that he's been doing what Brian Hoeing did last year. The only difference is he's more strikeout dominant than Brian Hoeing. And I mean, it's nice to see. And then I guess just staying on the minor league side, Troy Johnston today with 1 hit, 1 RBI, maybe a homer. That's really about it. The Wahoo's offense has been pretty quiet today.
Do you want to highlight Jupiter in their interesting game? As we're speaking, they are down 18-2.
Are they actually? Oh my God!
Who started that game?
That was started by Juan Reynoso, and then in relief, this is a line you don't normally see. 9 runs allowed by the first reliever, Justin Fall, and then after that, Maycold Leon. Anyway, 18 runs allowed, 15 walks. 15 walks by this pitching staff. And
no, Reynoso gave up like 7. Reynoso gave up like 7 or 8 walks.
15 walks.
15 walks and a hit by pitch, and they still have 1 more inning that they need to go. Anyway, that is your minor league update for today.
Well,
I think Jacksonville won. Jacksonville won.
Oh yeah, Jacksonville.
Oh yeah, with the Joey Wendell homer. Yeah.
And I think with that, it's perfect time to get into predictions. So Eli, let's get that video.
This is prediction time.
It's time.
All right. So batting leadoff for us for predictions, as always.
Give me a moment to get our background set up the way that
we have our
results
from the break.
Get pinch hitter Lewis in this.
Yeah, let me I do have the results of that right here.
The total tally.
As you know, the Braves swept the series, and yet nobody picked a sweep for either side in this one. Everybody had it 2 out of 3.
That's what you get for being positive. That's what I get.
And so a very low-scoring series overall here, and there wasn't even like a clear MVP. It was Acuna, kind of him and Soler were kind of tied. Soler just based on what he did in this final game.
I hope his knee is fine, man. His knee is fine.
And so overall, a lot of optimism, even despite the matchup, that has backfired. And so the updated leaderboard, if I could pull that up for a moment as well.
Shout out Mr. Grant.
I'm slipping, man.
Ooh,
Gabriel Revilla takes sole possession of first place. Kevin is now in 3rd. And then, it's always a big roster jam. very
still
early in
first
the year.
style.
Ooh,
Even
I'll
those
take
of
first.
us, even those folks that don't currently subscribe to us, there's plenty of time for you to jump in and to catch up to us. So you can become a super subscriber on Twitter, as people know, but I just recently made an option here on YouTube as well. That's right in the description of this video. It is right on our channel page. I think I can even pull that up with a screenshot, just to make it really clear how you do that. You just click the join button on our channel and you can become a super subscriber and make predictions with us prior to every single series. That's one of the many perks you get for $2.99 per month.
Only $2.99.
Getting integrated into our Marlins coverage in such an intimate way throughout the entire season, even throughout the off season in various ways. It's a lot of fun. So let me just get this set up for prediction time the way that we want to, just like this. We have the background going. We need to get the soft music queued up, put it on a little loop. There we
Is
go.
Lewis even there?
starting leadoff for us. New predictions, Mr. Kevin Barral.
All right. I'm going to go Marlins take 2 out of 3. A little doubtful with the hoeing start. We'll see how that goes. And for my MVP, I am going to go with Sandy. I do think he'll turn it around. I think this is a start. I know Wrigley, hitter friendly, but you got to feel good with Sandy on the mound always in. I think he'll do it this time around. Sandy MVP, Marlins take 2 out of 3.
All right, next up, Mr. Lewis. Oh, wait, you're muted. There you go.
2 out of 3. Marlins will take 2 of 3. MVP will be Soler. He's going to figure some things out this series.
All right, I'll go next. Last time I was optimistic. Marlins got swept. I'm going to do the complete opposite. Cubs take 2 out of 3. MVP is going to be Seiya Suzuki.
This is why you aren't in first place.
Eli.
I also have the Cubs taking 2 out of 3. 3 straight afternoon games. They're trying to mess with the natural circadian rhythm that baseball players have. The Marlins aren't going to be ready. Cubs win 2 of these 3. MVP, somebody we have not mentioned during this entire show, Yan Gomes, having a very good year offensively for these Cubs. I imagine he starts 2 out of 3 games and does some damage at the plate.
Wasn't he on the concussion IL, or is that another one of their catchers?
Well, that would be a big wrinkle in here. That'd be a big wrinkle in here if he is on the concussion IL.
Let's see. While we have the music playing.
That's a good point. So he is not even going to play in this series, probably. Oh well, I guess I'm punting there.
Because change it.
Yeah, because we're so far in advance. Let me bring myself up again. I need to redo the MVP portion because I picked somebody that is going to have 0 win probability added. Instead of Yan Gomes, hell, I'll go with Tucker Barnhart for series MVP. Just because he's active, he's going to be playing in this series. Cubs win 2 out of 3, Tucker Barnhart MVP.
I'm guessing that's why Kevin mentioned them bringing up their catcher, Amaya.
Right.
Oh, well, there you go. Then, yeah, Edwin Rios probably gets DFA'd, yeah.
All right. So that was our 24-hour before the game stream. Anything you guys want to mention before we have another 12 hours before the first pitch?
Nope. Just enjoy the game.
I'm really excited.
Watch out.
Sandy pitch Sunday. I'll be covering that game remotely while they're in Chicago, so I'm really excited to get to watch that game. Hopefully he really starts to turn things around.
Noah's going to be there on, I think, Friday and Sunday for that Cubs series, right? Or is it Friday, Saturday, and Sunday?
Definitely Friday. I think it is Friday and Sunday, those 2 games. Noah Berger representing us at Wrigley. That's going to be a new stadium for us to do credentialed coverage at. That's
all right.
Nice,
No. We had Wyatt there last year.
You were correct about that.
That's right, for one game. One game.
Yes. But so
We're
I guess you could say
a new stadium soon, though, and with Arizona.
Second straight year that we're going to have a live in-person coverage at Wrigley. And aside from that, people just look out for a new episode of Fish Stripes Unfiltered that's publishing on YouTube and on the Fish on First podcast channel tomorrow. Kevin and Isaac banter, and then it's an interview with Marlins radio voice Kyle Seeloff, his first year as the main play-by-play radio guy for the Marlins. That was a good conversation that you'll get to hear on Friday.
All right. So stay tuned for
Love
that.
Kyle.
go watch Water Relief Podcast with Noah and Mr. Matt Barnes. As always, for myself, Daniel, for Kevin, for Eli, for Lewis, and his steering wheel, this has been Fish Stripes Live, presented by La Pop, LAPOP. Always go fish.
So Noah's covering on Sunday.